Martin Scorsese has harbored a lifelong fascination with the apostate. He loves the coward, the rat, the addict, the blasphemer, and the betrayer because he is cut from their cloth. Mean Streets, the film that catapulted his career into the stratosphere and defined his voice as one of the loudest of his rowdy artistic generation, opens with a brusque, clipped monologue on exactly this subject, the central question that will come to define his generation-spanning career. We watch our protagonist, aspiring mafioso and small-time thug Charlie Kappa, staring at himself in the mirror in sleep-addled horror, disoriented and disassociated from his body, feeling his features to know himself, wondering, is this it? Is this who I am? Is this all I am? Is this all I will ever be? But you don't make up for your sins in church. You do it in the street. The rest, Kappa says, is bullshit. And then, bam! The Ronettes blow the back of your skull out with a shotgun shell of a needle drop, one of the greatest of all time. This was the world's introduction to Martin Scorsese. How could we not fall in love at first sight? In my last sophomoric analysis of the themes that define a singular filmmaker's career, I waxed poetic with breathless purple prose about the monster at the end of Wes Anderson, the way all of Wes's films invariably find themselves sucked into the whirlpool of an all-devouring mono-metaphor for his existential anxieties. With Marty, it's easy to be reductive and say his filmography can be boiled down to purely distilled Catholic guilt, but I don't think that's entirely true. His Catholicism and Italian-American heritage may provide a formal framework for his feelings on guilt and familial fidelity, but beneath the surface, it's always felt like he's nursing a wound that's much more personal and sensitive in nature. Whatever that injury might be, though, I don't think faith is Scorsese's main subject. Rather, guilt is the force meant to sublimate the true concern of Marty's movies, the cowardice at the core of masculinity and the frightening fragility of male ego. And it all starts with Mean Streets. In this seminal text, Scorsese so beautifully diffuses the universal through the lens of his very particular world. This is one of the most Italian, Catholic, and New York movies of all time, and I can certainly relate to 2 out of those 3 things. Even as my palate has matured over the years, even as my sensibilities and taste for film have shifted, my love for Marty stuff has never quite faded, and this is exactly why. Few filmmakers make me feel as seen, reflect my thoughts and fears and insecurities and anxieties and idiosyncrasies and upbringing as completely as he does. In Mean Streets, Charlie's casual racism, his infidelity, his abuse, both verbal and physical, all of these are central to the way in which he performs his masculinity within his community, a community of criminals with a cult-like devotion to manliness and brotherhood that only runs skin deep. Religion is merely the only acceptable conduit he has to express the guilt he feels over the gulf between his beliefs and his actions. His insecurities manifest outwardly in the form of his malignance. At the core of Mean Streets is the contentious relationship between Charlie Kappa and his ne'er-do-well associate and neighborhood best friend, Johnny Boy. Charlie, as the better connected of the two in the criminal underworld, is constantly covering for Johnny with his debtors and smoothing over the feuds and fights he starts everywhere he goes. Every scrap, every scuffle, every scrape, every drunken night and dizzying height between the two is ultimately forgiven, brushed aside as these boys cling to each other for the flimsiest of reasons. They can claim it's for the sake of business, the neighborhood, their family, but hey, come on, what are you gonna do? And what can you do, really? What is there to be done? Charlie clings to Johnny because he has nowhere else to go. He was brought up right, which in the Italian-American tradition means he fears his parents and his family more than his God. So he can't just leave. That would be unthinkable. He owes a debt to his family, after all. He can't go get dinner with the girl he thinks is pretty. She's one of the untouchables, a black woman. And when confronted by his cohorts about his feelings for her, Kappa slings his own dirty little Italian slur at her, projection as protection from rejection. He can't move in with the other girl he's been seeing either, the nice, acceptable Italian one. She's an epileptic, she has seizures, that means she's defective and practically insane as far as his repressive family is concerned. He can't bring a character like that home to meet his mother. He can't leave the family business behind, not when he's so close to cementing himself as needed and necessary and indispensable to the operation, and maybe that will finally mean he is loved. And the only thing it cost Kappa to make it off the streets was everything that made him who he was. All it cost him was his soul.
My life has taken another turn again. The days move along with regularity over and over, one day indistinguishable from the next. A long, continuous chain. And suddenly, there is a change.
Taxi Driver paints an exhaustively complete picture of a painfully incomplete little man. Those scenes of ambient, ambulatory nightlife tinted in green and scored to sidewinding brass are untouchable, incontestable cinematic perfection, a palpable oxymoron in a movie in part about the way men construct an untouchable and seek to claim it for themselves on grounds of moral desert. Robert De Niro's Travis Bickle grows bitter, angry, and violent when the woman he grows infatuated with, political campaigner Betsy, fails to behave like the all-forgiving, deified ideal he constructed from a view through two sets of windows. Bickle, too, is racist, belligerent, and politically incoherent. This is by design. He casts aspersions upon sex workers, yet frequents seedy theaters showing pornography, which his dopamine-addled brain can no longer differentiate from film. His idiot politics, purely derived by the prejudice of his id, now govern our day and age. During a ride in his cab, Travis asks a presidential hopeful to sweep all the garbage of New York City into the gutter, pointedly referring to the city's black denizens whom he despises in an unsteady silence. Following his abortive romance, Bickle plots the assassination of that same politician, but is ultimately dissuaded by the presence of his security retinue, whom he attempted to impress. A former veteran, he resents government and authority as much as he craves supplication to it. Travis's treatment of women and minorities is performed for masculine approval to the ends of his masculine ego. This is the thesis of Taxi Driver. Marty says so himself. In the film, he appears midway through his own movie in a cameo role as one of Bickle's passengers, a man who repeatedly and pathetically needles Travis for his approval over the violent way he intends to handle his wife's persistent infidelity. In the disjointed conclusion of Taxi Driver, his assassination attempt foiled, Travis instead pivots to targeting several local pimps exploiting an underage girl named Iris, once again motivated by his self-serving savior complex, having finally found a brand new, perfectly idealized and nubile Madonna to deify. The news is unsure of how to spin his crime of passion, but because the utilitarian ramifications of his slaying tip the scales in the favor of the authority he resents but longs to lick the boot of, he gets to be a hero. The dwindling in size of the articles he clips out is executed so silently and perfectly, as is his braggadocio in boasting that the papers blow things out of proportion. Scorsese is very good at writing endings that feel impossible because our main characters get exactly what they wanted, only for it to ruin them. Travis is forever fidgeting, wild eyes darting in the rear-view mirror, unsatisfied and unsettled by the self-loathing that has settled into the core of his being and stayed there. Suddenly there is a change, and you can never go back to the way things were before.
So give me a stage where there's bullheck and rage, and though I can fight, I'd much rather recite. That's entertainment. That's entertainment.
Raging Bull is the most painful conversation Martin Scorsese has ever had with himself. Whatever exposed nerve is aching at the heart of his filmography, whatever thing he's sublimating through his creation, it's the thing he's nursing here. Fresh off a death drive bender that left him a hobbled addict holed up in the hospital, his longtime friend Robert De Niro gifted him the biography of a small-time boxer, a story he initially resented for the parallels to his own life, but eventually came to claim as his own. The rest is not history, but legend now, the making of Raging Bull relegated to myth. Of similarly mythical status is the story of the day the real LaMotta visited the set of the film, and after watching De Niro perform a particularly harrowing scene of spousal abuse, turned to his wife and asked if he was really that bad. She responded, simply, that he was worse. Perhaps Raging Bull feels the rawest of Marty's films because his feelings on the futility of his ego are so naked. The usual protective veneer of faith or family that insulates them has completely vanished from view, leaving us with a painfully explicit rendering of the frailty of masculinity. LaMotta is an insane, possessive, paranoid man. He is a boxer and a fighter by his trade, a man in pursuit of it all, the platonic patriarchal ideal. Beautiful wife, shot at the title, fame, guts, gold, glory, but it does not satisfy him. That is simply not the kind of animal he is. Violence is what he is, all he knows. His violence outside the ring towards his wife is an assertion of dominance. His violence in the ring towards his opponents is an act of submission. A masochistic glutton for punishment, he devours his opponent's blows, treating the pain and grievous injury they inflict upon him as both proof of his masculinity and penance for his awfulness, but it's not enough. Every time the bell rings, he seeks not only absolution for his sins, but vindication for his crimes. To LaMotta, might makes right. When his wife confesses she finds another fighter attractive, he mangles his face beyond repair in the ring. The logic is simple and bestial, and as much as men might protest against it, ultimately this calculus is a sound one within the rules of the game men play. He ain't pretty no more. This is not to say that LaMotta is cast as some archetypical man by Scorsese, though. He is a dark, warped, mirror reflection of masculine id, as are many of his protagonists. Seared into my mind is that shot of Sugar Ray Robinson wheezing raggedly as he stares down at LaMotta on the ropes, the lights of the arena framing his head like a halo. Sugar is winning their fight at this point, and handily, but he still seems terrified by the creature standing opposite him in the ring. When LaMotta stares back at Sugar Ray, there is nothing in his eyes. Jake LaMotta is the devil himself. He is a living reminder of the implicit violence patriarchy can condone in its most unfettered form. By the end of the film, his own brother can't even bear to look him in the eye. LaMotta takes the violence implicit in Charlie Kappa's abuse of women and Travis Bickle's lecherous predilection for youth and purity and makes them painfully, horribly explicit. When he first marries his wife at the start of the film, despite her being freshly 15 years old, the abhorrence of their union is conveniently overlooked. A society that celebrates and venerates his violence is all too happy to turn a blind eye. Later in life, when he replicates that same crime much older and fatter, when he can no longer perform his toxic caricature of his own gender, when he is unfit for the feats of strength and fits of violence that justified his bad behavior, he is cast aside cruelly and without warning. The entire picture is shot in grainy, high-contrast black and white, save for a single sequence, a dazzlingly colorful reel of Super 8 shot by Jake himself, a montage of perfectly manicured newlywed bliss. It is a staggering visual metaphor for the protective projection patriarchy cultivates, a facade rendered in defense of the frail masculine ego. A beautiful house, a beautiful wife, a beautiful child. His wife is a child. Jake LaMotta was never beaten, not once in the entirety of Raging Bull. Even Sugar Ray Robinson couldn't knock the devil down to his knees. LaMotta beats himself, breaks himself, is broken by his sickness. But while he was fit and strapping a fiery young stallion, he was a magnificent beast. How he danced and danced, darting amongst the shadows, throwing punches like there was no tomorrow and taking them like he hoped there wouldn't be. The ring was his church, and the blows his broken body endured were the penance for the pain he caused to those foolish enough to care for him. LaMotta ends the film fundamentally and hopelessly broken, his body a sure sign of his descent into indolence, fat-faced and flat-nosed and bald-headed and barrel-chested and scarred, an almost cartoonish depiction of a man. He has literally, visibly been ravaged by the violence inherent to his ideology. We can no longer even recognize him as human. He is dancing for our attention, dancing in the shadows, performing poetry now, but no one cares for the sensitive side of a raging bull. He is weeping for something, but we do not know what. His wails, we realize, are in the key of mean streets. Is this it? Is this who I am? Is this all I am? Is this all I will ever be? He is dancing. You will always be dancing because masculinity is always a performance that nurses some hidden hurt.
You want to know who my mother and father are? You want to know who my God is? Fear. You look inside me and that's all you'll find.
Marty Scorsese has held a lifelong fixation with the apostate. In The Last Temptation of Christ, Scorsese cast Jesus himself as the ultimate apostate. I am endlessly fascinated by Willem Dafoe's casting here. He is both an immensely beautiful human specimen and yet so imperfectly human. When shot in profile, those staggering cheekbones and rough-hewn features of his are almost incomprehensibly Christ-like, or what we think that looks like anyways. But shot straight on, his nose is crooked and his jaw juts proudly. He is perhaps the perfect man to cast as the Western ideal of Jesus, that blonde-haired, blue-eyed savior. In its opening scene, the film's version of Christ himself crucifies a man that looks more like the real thing than he does. Maybe this is the real reason why Last Temptation was despised by the Christian West. For this Jesus, Last Temptation's Jesus, looks like the good American Jesus we all know and love, but he walks and talks and acts just like the real thing, and they cannot stand it. Because the real thing repudiates everything they stand for by virtue of his very existence. Jesus starts the film as a supplicant to power. He is a carpenter. There's not much demand for woodwork in Nazareth, save for crosses, so he has a hand in the evil of his day. He sees the totality of his selfishness and sin, and when his lonely little soul is pitted against the world, he is weak and overwhelmed. He grows resentful of his own weakness, and it hardens his heart, so he submits and complies and is made complicit. He is afraid. But Jesus becomes radicalized. He walks in the world and comes to see the way of it. He starts from a place of fear and reaches pity first, pity for himself and for all man and life, for our fragility and cruelty to one another. Pity, then love for those who have none, for the meek and downtrodden. Love, then rage. And yet, this divine mercy and outrage is at war with the weakness of man within him. To portray Christ faithfully in Marty's mind was to truly embrace the Nicene Creed, to render him as fully God, yes, but also fully man. And to become fully man is to embrace the greatest of our failings, to acknowledge the frailty of the male ego. When, in the last hour of his final test, Jesus is seduced by a vision of his future liberated of strife and sacrifice, the fiction fed to him by temptation is pure patriarchy. There's only one woman in the world, in his world, and her name is Mary. She is the mother he must forsake, she is the childhood love he must abandon, she is the flirtations of an idle future not so easily banished as he once thought in the desert. And ironically, in the end, it is not Christ's realization of his own masculine mistreatment of Mary and Mary and Mary that saves him. It is his desire for the homosocial approval of Judas Iscariot, of the whole men, who Martin Scorsese casts as Christ's most devoted follower who betrayed him because he needed to be betrayed. For God so loved the world that he gave us his only begotten Son, a Son who had to sin to mirror our own worst sins in turn. And in his darkest hour, in the depths of his despair, given the choice to end his torment, he chose to struggle and sacrifice for something more than himself. He claws and crawls and cries and bleeds and begs for the cross. I want the cross, I want the cross, he wails like a mantra, desperate for his death for salvation. For the cross is borne by victims and makes them victorious, and this is what he wanted for us. He didn't have a choice. In that way, he was more human than all of us. Jesus did not choose to be born the Son of God any more than we choose to be born what we are. His choice was in accepting his burden. His only choice was in reckoning with his sin. In watching The Last Temptation, this beautifully imperfect movie, you do start to understand why they call this the greatest story ever told. Even if that's not true. Even if you're not religious, you can see why this message of love and mercy would be so resonant through the centuries, but therein, of course, lies the rub, because this is just a story. And the story of Christ has become synonymous with colonization, cultural extinction, barbarism, brutality, repression, racism, abuse, trauma, idolatry, genocide, homophobia, and all of it in his name. Martin Scorsese's theology is that of the apostate. It has to be. Only an apostate could still love this story as a story. They called him a heretic for that, back then. It hardly matters now. I've been thinking a lot about Kichijiro lately.
You can certainly look after yourself.
Not to be selfish. I am like you. I have nowhere else to go. Where is the place for a weak man? In a world like this.
Silence is, in my estimation, Martin Scorsese's greatest achievement as a filmmaker. 28 years separate The Last Temptation and Silence, but that's okay. Marty's been working on Silence over all that time. He's never stopped working on Silence. In that time, he's grown older and wearier, and he hopes a little wiser for all the wear. Age has sobered him, sharpened his perspective, brought with it a terrible clarity about the trajectory of his own life. Despite it all, Scorsese wears his age well. This late period of his career has produced some of his most staggering accomplishments, The Irishman, Killers of the Flower Moon, but Silence, to me, stands alone. It is the closest Marty's ever come to untangling his faith, his family, his fear of death, that thing that's been gnawing at him. In Last Temptation, Christ himself is painted as the ultimate apostate, their patron saint, the martyr to which the weak and wretched pray. Silence tells the story of the weakest and most wretched of all apostates. Silence is not the story of Andrew Garfield's bright-eyed Father Rodriguez, nor his mentor, Liam Neeson's stone-faced Father Ferreira. It is the story of a man named Kichijiro, played by Yosuke Kubozuka. The story goes like this. In the 15th century, a traveling mission of Jesuit priests on a religious envoy in Japan are captured by the shogunate. Years later, Rodriguez and Garupe, the students of the priest leading that mission, receive word from Japan that their mentor Ferreira has renounced his faith. In disbelief, they mount another mission to the island, determined to disprove these allegations they vehemently believe to be false. Their guide is an inebriated Japanese fisherman named Kichijiro, who has committed a terrible sin and has thus been banished from home. Repeatedly, the slovenly, irate man denies being a Christian like them. Christians die, he says simply. They die in Nagasaki. Eventually, overcome with curiosity, Rodriguez, the more idealistic of the two Jesuits, asks Kichijiro to tell him, by way of confession, what happened to drive him away from home. Then tearfully, Kichijiro prostrates himself on his knees, relieved to have been unburdened. The shogunate, resistant to the cultural imperialism of the church's mission, has been mercilessly slaughtering Catholic priests and Japanese converts alike, a barbarism the church itself was no stranger to. When the Inquisition came to his city, the humble Kichijiro was offered a choice. He could apostatize and renounce his faith by treading upon a fumie, a carving of Christ himself, the sole of their dirty foot meant to sully the image of their devotion. He could step, or he could die. It is only a formality, the Inquisitors say. And Kichijiro steps, but his family does not. But I could not abandon them, he says, even if I had abandoned God. So I watch them die. Wherever I go, I see the fire and smell the flesh. Silence is one of the most excruciating films I have ever watched. Rodriguez and Garupe are sheltered in secret by a village of Christians who have quietly and bravely kept their faith alive. They are earnest converts, one and all, believers in a vision of the Son of God, who preaches love and mercy, who believed the meek would be eternally rewarded in a world beyond this, who are weary of their toil under the feudal shogunate, and they are, one and all, betrayed, once again by Kichijiro, who sold them out, once again, to save his own life. Moments before his apprehension, Rodriguez stares into a crystal-clear spring and sees in his haggard reflection the image of Christ himself. I pray for God's forgiveness, cries Kichijiro, as Rodriguez is led away in bondage, as Rodriguez contemplates forgiving him as Christ did Judas. Rodriguez wants it. Like Christ before him, Rodriguez is only flesh and blood. He is only a man with a man's hubris. And like Christ before him in the Last Temptation, like Marty himself did 30 years before, Rodriguez says he wants the cross. He would gladly die for his faith. But time has a way of sobering us. Scorsese sees something he did not then, that this fantasy of self-sacrifice, of a death that absolves a man of sin and justifies his faith should he die right, is nothing but an invention of the masculine ego. Life is rarely so convenient. And the daimyo of Nagasaki, too, has learned in time. Inoue-sama has learned from the cruelty of the church towards indigenous beliefs. The first wave of Catholic priests he tortured and killed, but this only strengthened the resolve of their believers. He will not kill Rodriguez, not now or ever. He aims to break him. And so, one by one, each member of Rodriguez's flock is mercilessly tortured and executed before his very eyes. Silence is one of the most excruciating films I have ever watched. We witness each and every last one of these horrible deaths firsthand, each novel in their cruelty. It is unrelenting in its brutality. There is no solace. We hear their screams. We see the fire. We smell the flesh. Rodriguez's counterpart, Garupe, is beaten, emaciated, and eventually dies himself, and Rodriguez weeps and growls and gnashes his teeth bitterly in jealousy. He wishes it were him. Rodriguez meets with Kichijiro while in bondage, who beseeches him for forgiveness, for mercy, and this only hardens the heart of Rodriguez, strengthens his resolve. He sees it as a test sent to him by God to prove he is Christ-like, to forgive this most odious of sinners, this contemptible creature in whom he finds no kinship. Father, how could Jesus love a wretch like this? Rodriguez wonders. There is evil all around in this place. I sense its strength, even its beauty, but there is none of that in this man. He is not worthy to be called evil. Years ago, Kichijiro protests in return, I could have died a good Christian. There was no persecution. Why was I born now? This is so unfair. I am sorry, he cries, for being so weak. I am sorry, he cries, that this has happened. I am sorry, he cries, for what I did to you. Help me, Padre. Take away the sin. I will try again to be strong. Rodriguez finally meets his master, Ferreira, who has indeed apostatized. Ferreira, who reveals to Rodriguez that none of his followers even understand their faith. They believe the Son of God to be the Son of God, the symbol of their country. Their mission has been wholly lost in translation, and each further death only satisfies his own fragile young ego, fills the bottomless hole in his soul, feeds his own greed for absolution and suffering, and the masochism of martyrdom. And still, Rodriguez stubbornly refuses to apostatize. He still clings to his faith, even though he realizes that no matter how hard he begs for an answer, he cannot hear God's voice. There is only silence. In the climax of the film, Rodriguez finally hears the voice of God. 5 more Christians are being tortured. 5 who have already apostatized their own faith. 5 more who will suffer and die needlessly because of him. And Christ himself commands Rodriguez that he should tread upon his face. It is only a formality, the Inquisitors say. And Rodriguez finally mercifully steps. He never hears the voice of God again. Rodriguez surrenders his faith. He remains in Japan as a prisoner of the state. He takes a Japanese wife. He becomes part of the Inquisition, searching for Christian contraband in every foreign import. He takes a servant. That servant's name is Kichijiro. And one day, when the house is empty and no one else is around, his humble servant sinks to his knees, cries, and once more begs the man, no longer a priest, to hear his confession. The true narrative arc of this film is told silently in all 4 of Kichijiro's confessionals. In the first, Rodriguez bears down on him, bracing the whole of his weight upon Kichijiro's back, literally looking down on him, impressing him with the burden of guilt. In the second, Rodriguez is sat with his side to Kichijiro, the priest closing his eyes as he makes the sign of the cross, too full of contempt for his betrayal to even meet his gaze. In the third, Rodriguez turns his back entirely on the sinner, refusing to even acknowledge him. He performs confession for Kichijiro purely out of the compunction drilled into him through the ritual of his faith. In the fourth and final confession, Rodriguez mirrors his posture at the start. But this time he lowers himself down to the other man's level. He is as unworthy to receive this sinner's confession as Kichijiro is to offer it. He finally sees Kichijiro, finally understands their mutual frailty. Rodriguez is no longer leaning on Kichijiro. They are leaning on each other. This is an embrace. Rodriguez and Kichijiro continue to lean on one another all the way up until the end of the film, when the Inquisition finds one last piece of Christian contraband within his home. And when asked under penalty of death to whom the cross belongs, Kichijiro says it is his. The film does not treat Kichijiro's ultimate fate as a triumph or tragedy. It does not pass judgment on whether or not this lone act of redemption means Rodriguez's faith was finally justified, or if Kichijiro himself was ultimately made good after all the wickedness his cowardness had wrought. But in closing on this scene of a silent burning cross, a symbol of Rodriguez's private devotion, proof that, despite it all, his faith survived, Scorsese seems to have come to a quiet realization. Whatever wounded him enough to make these movies, he will let it die in him. But given enough time, given enough second chances, given faith, even the lowest of us all can finally do good. I've been thinking a lot about Kichijiro lately. There's a reason for that. Today is my birthday. I am turning 23 years old. It's easy to be open and earnest and honest about one's faith, one's feelings, oneself, in any time other than their own. But there is persecution. There is always persecution, and I am a weak and fragile and frail thing. In the face of persecution, compliance, complicity, performance is always the path of least resistance. It's easy to suffocate beneath your own skin, even if it dooms you to derangement. Even if you'll always be looking back with wild eyes, wondering what might have been if you were brave. I shave in the shower without looking at my reflection in the mirror. I have done this for some years now. The frosted panes of the shower walls offer me safety, insulation, isolation. I'm scared of what I see in the mirror. And on the rare chance when I do catch my eye, I feel despair because I'm only ever getting worse. I am sorry for being so weak. I am sorry this has happened. I am sorry for what I did to you. I am sorry for everything I have ever done and ever been. I stare at myself and wonder, is this it? This is who I am? Is this all I am? Is this all I will ever be? And in those moments, I take a little solace in the fact that if nothing and no one else in the world does, at least Marty Scorsese loves me. For Marty Scorsese loves a coward. I'm Frostbyte Freeman, and until next time, stay frosty.